continue beyond that. Anyway, I'd like you to welcome a great guy, Dave Warren, who's going to talk to you from now on. He's going to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Do you want me to mute you?
I'll mute myself.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, thanks, Tony. Kind words. Very nice. And yeah, I'm Dave Warren. I think I know most of you from recognizing you, but there are maybe one or two who don't know me. So I still call myself a budding jazz guitarist. I don't think you ever quite make it, but I'm definitely a budding trumpet player. And something I've just taken up in the last couple of months, partly is for reasons you can imagine, to fill my time during lockdown. So there you go. That's the first ever photograph of me taken playing the trumpet. What I'm here to do is to chat to you about something about playing with other musicians. It might, particularly if you haven't done much of that before, if you perhaps haven't been in a band before, and also running a band, my experiences of running a band. I'll give you some anecdotes about what's gone well and what's not gone so well. But also to make it particularly relevant to the situation we're in at the moment, I'd also like to talk about how you can play with other musicians online. And with varying degrees of success, I have managed to play live without any great expense with other musicians, and it's been reasonably successful. And I think we're in this for the long haul, and so I think that it could be something that we're going to be continuing to do after all this is over. So apologies if you've come along to hear me playing the trumpet for an hour. I'm not going to be doing that. But what I will say is, let me just get these. There we go. You should see on the screen, hopefully, a little chat button at the bottom. And if you do want to send a comment to me, please put the message in the chat box rather than waving on the screen, because I can't see everybody. And what I'll do is I'll stop every sort of 15 minutes or so. It's not going to be a particularly long session. I'll stop after 10 minutes or so. And if there's any comments or questions, we can stop and have a look at that before continuing on. So put your comments in the chat button at the bottom of the screen. In fact, it already says we've got 2 chat messages. So I better check what they are. Okay, well, I'll come back to that. Okay, well, there's a nice looking guy. That's not me with lots of hair. That's Dave Cliff. And that's where this story begins, because I was on a summer school in several years ago over in Cardiff. It was actually Buster Birch's jazz summer school, which a lot of people may know about and been on. And I found myself in the queue behind him in the lunch cafeteria and got chatted. And during a lull in the conversation, I said, do you do lessons? And he said he does, from his house in London. And so eventually I arranged to have a lesson. It's just that I liked his guitar playing. I thought maybe he'll give me some tips. So a couple of months later, I turned up and sat down in his front room. He handed me a guitar because I didn't carry one across London. So fortunately he had a spare. He actually the guitar he handed me was an ES-175, a Gibson, which he played when he played at Ronnie Scott's for Nina Simone. So a bit of pedigree in the guitar that he handed me. It was a right battered old guitar, but lovely sounding thing. Anyway, we got into the lesson and he said, right, what we're going to do is you're going to play a tune, talking to me. And he said, what do you know? And I said, oh, well, Autumn Leaves, I suppose. And so I started, he said, right, off you go then, count yourself in. I'll play the chords. You, Dave, you play the tune. So I got through about the first 12 bars or so, all going fine. Then suddenly it all got a bit hazy, all struggled in the middle section and got to the end and thought, that wasn't great, was it? And he didn't say anything, but he just said, well, let's just try something else. So Blue Bossa, okay, here we go. Same problem, got halfway through, started floundering, and I decided, okay, let's stop that one. And he bluntly, he's a nice chap, but he did bluntly say, you don't know any songs, do you? And I said, you're right, I don't. and he wasn't going to sit there and start teaching me. But so after the lesson, I just basically went home and said, I've just got to learn some songs. It's no good thinking you're a jazz guitarist if you can't play a single tune from start to finish. So I went home and started learning some tunes, and they started to come on reasonably well. One or two took a little while, then they, as you may have tried yourself, they start to get easier the more you learn, because certain patterns come up more than once. But what I was finding, of course, is after learning about 5 or 6, that I'd start to forget the first few songs that I'd learned. And so this is when I thought the best thing to do is actually to have somebody else to play with. And so I started thinking about phoning up other people and maybe even thinking in one day getting a band together, but start with just 1 or 2 musicians. So there's an actual motivation there to learn these songs. There's many reasons why people get together with other musicians, and one of them is, of course, to learn your instrument, whatever that instrument may be. But it's a bit of motivation. He looks like a motivating guy, doesn't he? So motivation is definitely one thing. It's very social as well, just to make friends. We all like to chat about stuff, but it's nice having a hobby in common that you can talk about. And that can also further your knowledge of the instrument as well, just by chatting about, especially when you're talking to another guitarist, they can give you tips about, how to play and what they've learned and so on. So that's important as well. And but the other thing, of course, is actually learning songs, digging out a songbook, and with the other musician, whatever their instrument, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same instrument as yours. If you're a guitarist, it's nice to have somebody playing a melody instrument, such as a saxophone. So I think really that's what I'm saying at the moment here, is just don't sit and wait for the telephone to ring. Actually get out there and contact people, get other musicians, whatever their instrument, and play together. And that'll help you learn not only your instrument, but also songs. And this is what I started to do in the early days before DWJQ, my current jazz group, started. If you just sit around and wait for the telephone to ring, you're just going to be an unhappy baby. So make the first step. There are many other ways of finding musicians. You don't have to use the telephone. By the way, I just noticed on that telephone, now I can see it full size, it's an Isle of Wight telephone. And yes, they're probably downloading all their apps as we speak. Anyway, moving on. Yes, there are lots of ways of meeting other musicians. Workshops, of course, jam sessions, open mic nights. And there are websites as well, Band Mix, Join My Band, even Gumtree, where you might go and want to go sell your fridge. There are pages on there for meeting musicians as well. So I often personally find it's best to do it in a human situation, shall we say, rather than a website, because you can actually get to know the person first. If it's just one other musician, you can't really, it's not so easy to actually audition them. Somebody comes around your house and you audition them and say, no, I don't want to be your friend and play with you. It's a bit different when you're in a band. You can audition people and say, we'll call you, so to speak. So it's perhaps best to go to maybe a jam session and get to know someone first before you then say, do you fancy having a little jam one day? And that one day at the moment might be a long way off, but nevertheless, that's probably a better way to meet people for music. Now, when it comes to a band and recruiting for a band, but this also does apply to individuals. One of the things there's 3 things I think a musician needs to have. Now, you're all going to start thinking, especially those that play with me, have I got those 3 things? I'm thinking now. I think there are only 3 qualities that you need as a musician to play with other musicians. Here we go. What are they? You're not Nigel Price, no. Quality number 1, I think, is that you can play your instrument. Now, I'm not talking about at a virtuosic level, but just at an instrument, a level compatible with the person that you're going to play with. So you need to be roughly at the same level, some people do say it's good to play with musicians who are far more experienced than you, because that brings you up to their level. But then you've got to think about how long that person wants to continue bringing you up to their level, so to speak. So long as you're in the same sort of ballpark, that's good. But playing your instrument is one of the first quality, that fairly obvious one perhaps. But now we're going back to that thing I was saying earlier about meeting people. You do need to be able to get on with people, and this little quartet clearly are quite happy with each other's company. But you're not going to feel like phoning somebody up and saying, do you want to come round for a rehearsal, if you really don't like that person. So make sure it's somebody that you get on well with. And now this slide, I tried this slide out on somebody the other day and they didn't understand it. No, it doesn't mean you've got to be willing to carry people around in your car or all the band equipment. It's a Volvo. It's very reliable. And that's the third quality I think that all musicians must have, is reliability. The last thing, it doesn't matter how great a musician you are, if you can't be bothered turning up on time or bothering to learn the songs, then you're not really going to be of much use to the people that you're going to be playing with. So they're the three things I think are the most important. You can play your instrument, you get on well with people, and you're a reliable kind of person. And with those things in mind, I think you'll do well. So, and that's what you're looking for in other people. Now, I tried that, and I tried to find this, so these guys were interested, but they weren't, clearly. So I kept looking around, and eventually I ended up with these guys. And this is the latest lineup of DWJQ. It went through a few changes of bass player, and Annette on the left there joined more recently. But that was the end of my pursuit of knowledge of songs. It all started with that meeting with Dave Cliff, the lesson, when I realized I just didn't know any songs all the way through, and started playing with different people. I do play with other people as well, Gil and Graham and others, and but the band has helped me greatly in learning lots of songs. And it's the motivation factor. It's knowing that you've got a rehearsal coming up, and that that makes you sit down and learn. If you haven't got anything to plan towards, what are you going to do? You're not likely to sit there and spend more than a half an hour playing your instruments. So I really do encourage people to, even in this situation we're in at the moment, is to find other musicians to play with, even if it's just once a month. And you can always ask. They might say no. I know people fear rejection, but do ask. Okay, now I'm just going to just go on to the next. Trying to be cryptic here. I'm just going to unmute one or two people if they've asked a question. That's a trumpet mute. I'm getting carried away with my trumpet now, aren't I? I'm just going to stop the share now and just see if we've got any messages. There are a couple of things in there. I don't think they're necessarily just both saying good morning, right? If anyone has got any questions, do ask. I will unmute Tony just in case he's got anything he particularly wants to say. It's not letting me unmute you, Tony. I think you better unmute yourself. I'm talking to Tony Sandyman here. There you go, Tony.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello, Dave. Yeah.
Hello.
I'm not sure. I'm just. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Good. Right. Yeah, I put the headphones on, but I'm finding that rather a spooky experience. So I might go back to this. Yeah. Very interesting, Dave. And so you were saying that it was a kind of musical reason that drove you to forming a band, because you suddenly realised that there was a hole in your playing that you wanted to exploit. Yeah, I've been in similar situations where, there's obviously, if you can't get in a band, nobody wants you to. That's a great point. Just get your own organisation together. But I guess you're going to get onto the next section, which is going to tell you what all the slings and arrows are of organising a band. And
that's right. Yes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a band that we're talking about. It could be just you and a couple of others who just want to practice together, a more fluid, sort of friendly group of people who just want to work on material. But that's right. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, sorry, what was your point before that?
Well, no,
And
I was just sort of reiterating what you said, but actually,
yes,
what is interesting is that you're saying that, of course, that this doesn't necessarily have to result in going out and getting gigs, which are
no.
increasingly rare. They're absent now, but even in following the lockdown, you don't have to go out and do gigs. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm really, that's right. It's more about learning your instrument and your own musicality. And that's what I was concerned about. I didn't originally form DWJQ to get gigs, although getting the gigs is one of the things which motivates you to then rehearse, to practice, and of course to get into that situation. So that all improves you. It's really building my own internal motivation system, I suppose, making myself, if I say to myself, if I arrange with another guitarist, Gil, for example, if he's there, I can't see him, but every now and again I meet up with Gil, the guitarist. Straight away, that means I've got a goal to set myself. I've got a couple of songs I'm going to learn to play with him when the time comes. So it's just the mere fact I've arranged a meeting with somebody. And I think that's very important with musicians, particularly because it's very easy to let that instrument just gather dust in the corner of the room. And the phone rarely, I mean, I've been playing for a long time and I can't remember the last time somebody phoned me up and said, you fancy playing, not out of the blue anyway. So I think that tends to be the way it's, I'm not going to take that personally either. But
No.
good. Okay. Well, we're up to 50 people now. So obviously quite a few people have joined since. I hope anyone who joined after 10 o'clock realised what they've arrived to listen to. And it's me, Dave Warren, chatting about playing with other people, other musicians, and I'm going to move on now to some of my experiences about running the band. I'm not going to mention any names here, and I think most of them are sitting out there listening as well. So it's not really about running DWJQ, it's just my experiences. Because, of course, some of you will know I'm also heavily involved in the band Dukes, the ukulele band, and which has been quite successful. And so I've got experiences from that as well. So just going to move on now to the next slide. And where are we? Oh, yes, we got as far as that, didn't we? Yes, the running a band has pros and cons. You get different sorts of leaders of bands. You get the dictator variety, and you get the other, well, perhaps where there isn't a leader, the more democratic approach, or cooperative approach, you might call it. I do actually prefer the dictator variety, as some of you probably know. Although dictator with listening skills, I think is the, perhaps what I'm thinking is the best approach. Who's that dictator with the moustache? He's one of my favourites. That's right, Frank Zappa. Fantastic musician, but he used to surround himself with brilliant musicians who could actually play his compositions. I don't think he could actually perform a lot of what he wrote. I think he wrote it with these other much more technically able musicians in mind. But he was a brilliant leader of bands, and for decades, to the point where the band could be swinging along through a jazz tune on stage and he could just click his fingers and they'd change to reggae. He wouldn't even have to count them in. They were that tight, and he was in that much control that. But he was probably at the far end of the scale in terms of dictatorship. Now, one of the things I do like to get bands to do, and I can't remember ever actually saying this explicitly to any of the bands I've been in, but it's in my head that they should do, is separate out practice, rehearse, and perform. This applies to all sorts of music in that we have practice sessions, we have rehearsals, and we have performances, but we shouldn't blur the lines between them. So in other words, when you're at home, you should be practicing, and you should be learning the song that you're about to, the song that you're working on. So sitting at home, learning your songs, you know, if you've been told what to learn, should be preparing as much as you can before you then get to the point where you're going to join the rest of the band and rehearse, usually for a gig, for example. So that when you get to the point where the rest of the band turn up, they're not sitting there waiting for you to learn the piece of music while they're sitting there already prepared. So the best thing to do, I know there's always going to be a situation where you can't complete your practice until you've tried it out with somebody else. That's always the case. But just as much as possible, divide the line between practicing at home, learning the material, and then coming to the rehearsal. The main point of the rehearsal is to bring the parts together so that you can check that everything's in place, that the arrangement of the song is ready, so that when you come to perform, you are actually, it's all been learned, it's all been memorized, and you can actually perform. This is the important thing. If you're still thinking about how a song goes, you aren't performing, you're still rehearsing, or even practicing for that matter. So it's very easy to sit here and say this is how it should be done, but at least if that's in the back of the minds of the people in the band or the group of musicians, then that clarification is made by the band leader, then things will move on at a greater pace, and there'll be more success as a result. So that's my approach to basic approach to running a band: practice, rehearse, perform. Now, I've been fortunate to DWJQ, as I said, has been through a number of incarnations, and the band members themselves do have responsibilities. It's not just all down to the band leader. Their responsibilities include buying drinks, and but also learning the music and playing to the best of their abilities, and of course supporting each other. This is a team after all. We are friends. We want to work together. And so it is important that the band members get on well. And this goes back to that picture of the meerkats. You know, do they look like a bunch of meerkats drinking beer? No, not quite. But so it's nice that they get on well together, because then they'll be more supportive in the musical arrangements that are going on, rather than competitive and trying to beat the other person and put them in a bad light and so on. So I think it's important that the band members get on well together. One of the responsibilities of the band leader, of course, is to enable that, is to encourage it, and not to say, you know, what you're doing sitting there drinking pints of beer, you should be practicing or tuning up. Do I say that? I hope I don't. The band, oh yeah, never did decide which photograph I wanted to use, but there you go. That's Tony on the left. That's Ian in the middle there, bass player, and Mick on the right. And Ian's no longer in the band, but we've got John Mattock now. I just thought I'd better name check the people while we're looking at these photographs. When it comes to rehearsals, this isn't DWJQ, by the way. When it comes to rehearsals, there's another little thing I think is very important to get the most out of a band. And that is to have a focused rehearsal where you know what you're going to do, where the band members know what they're going to do at the rehearsal. Now, it's possible that we'll just say, oh, we're going to rehearse on Tuesday. And everyone turns up and says, what are we going to do then? And then we start going through things. And of course, that's fine. That can work, and you can make some progress. But just going back to the practice, rehearse, perform idea, if you say to the band members beforehand at the rehearsal, we are going to do this song, and this song, and we're going to work on this intro, and we're going to look at that way, that ending, and so on, they know exactly what they need to practice at home, so they can come as fully prepared as they could possibly be to the rehearsal, so that the rehearsal can be a clearly focused rehearsal. Now, one thing that I don't think works is if somebody says, oh, we're just going to go through the set. So people look at their set list and think, goodness me, there's 36 songs on there, and they've got half an hour to spare at home, and they think, well, what shall I practice? Well, I don't know what he's going to say we're going to do at the rehearsal. Oh, I won't bother. But by having an actual focused list of achievable songs, then you can come clearly prepared to the rehearsal. And so I think that's one of the band leaders' responsibilities, is to make sure that the band members know what they've got to work on in order to come to the rehearsal and be able to, and then of course to stick to that plan and not go and do something completely different. And they all think, oh, that was a waste of time learning that song, we're not doing it now. So of course, it's also the band members' responsibilities to prod and I get this, and the band member knows who he or she is. Get a prod to say, "What are we doing at the rehearsal, Dave?" And I then have to jump about. Oh, right. But I better think about what we're going to do. So anyway, but that's all a good thing. That's another responsibility of a band member, is to prod the band leader now and again, and make sure they're doing their job. Just to give you an example of DWJQ, and one of the things we do at rehearsals, because we don't rehearse that often, well, not at all at the moment, but when we do have a gig, we usually have one beforehand, a rehearsal beforehand, quite naturally. And we do manage to get through 16 songs. Now, the way we do this is because we've got this idea of what's called an innie and an outie. And an innie and an outie, what that is a version of the song that we're going to perform where we play the intro, we play just one head and the tune with the tune, and then we play the ending as if that head, that tune, was the last head. So we leave out all the middle stuff, all the solos and the fours and so on, and we just do what we call an innie and an outie. And it basically makes sure that we just know pretty much that the song is going to work, that we've got the intro sorted out, because that's usually where it can go wrong. The ending can go wrong, and the head can sound a bit iffy, and we'll let the solos take care of itself. I think that was a phrase that somebody came up with once: get the beginning and ending right, and the middle will take care of itself. So we have these things called innie and outies, and that does mean you can get through an awful lot of songs in a short space of time, if that's what you've prepared to do for your rehearsal. So when we come to more like a technical or dress rehearsal before a gig, quite often we go through all the songs by innie and outies. But when it comes to a general middle of the week sort of rehearsal for no particular reason, then we go back to that idea of making sure it's a focused rehearsal and everyone knows what they're going to do. Now, driving all that, of course, is the set list, and working back from that, you know what to rehearse. So having a clear set list, if you've got a gig, we're now talking about gigs, of course, having a clear set list is obviously important. I think Nigel last week was chatting about bands that sort of turn around and say, "What are we going to do next, Fred?" And then there's the conversation, "Oh, I don't like that, so I'm not doing that." And, you know, if you're playing in front of an audience, they haven't come to see you have a conversation about what your favourite song is. They just want to be entertained. And it is still, even jazz music, like any sort of music, it's still just entertainment. We mustn't get above ourselves. It is just entertainment. The audience have got to enjoy it. And the last thing they want is to see a band sort of looking like they haven't prepared anything. And it's an easy thing to do, is to get a set list together and make sure everyone's absolutely sure what they're going to be playing. Because then, again, they can focus their practice on the songs that you are going to do, rather than worrying about you're going to call all the things you are in a strange key and wonder how on earth do you practice for that in the first place. So, yeah, great. There are some musicians who can do that, and that's great. But for the majority of us, I think it's important to have a clear set list. I normally try and work out exactly how long the set list needs to be based on the amount of time we've got in the venue, and don't usually add on extras. Some band members like to put on a few extras on the end in case they want to change the set around or play a bit longer. But do bear in mind, if you're going to do that, that the musicians do have to know those songs just as well as they know the core members' items in the set. So don't just stick a few songs on the end for the fun of it. Make sure they've been well rehearsed as well, because if they get called, those songs have just got to sound just as good, because the audience don't know you've suddenly added an extra in. So to do make sure that you know, all the songs there are ones likely to be used. Good. Now, don't turn up drunk to. Yes, I don't know how that slide got in there. That's me a few years ago. Let's move on from that one. Yeah, band leaders. They've got more responsibilities than you probably think, especially when you're on the stage. Now, I'm not sure why I'm mentioning this, because it may be just for the understanding of other members of bands and so on, but people like Count Basie here and others, not only are they thinking about the piece of music they're playing, they've got to count in the song, They've got to direct the band. But then more than that, they've also got to think about the management of the venue. Is he happy? Are people buying drinks? Is the audience happy? Do they look like they don't want another ballad? They'd rather have another fast tune, or they don't want another fast tune. Should I change the set around and bring in another number? Got to keep an eye on the time. We've got to play till midnight. Have we got enough songs? So there's an awful lot to think about. Can I remember the names of all the band members? That's another one, and so on. And also, sometimes songs run from one to another. And imagine trying to get into your head the tempo of the song that's about to start, so you can do a counting, when the current song is still playing. And while all this is happening, playing your own instrument. So, yes, there is a fair amount going on in the head of a band member. So I'm just asking for a bit of sympathy here in case anyone thinks, what's he doing? So, no, Count Basie, great band leader. Wes Montgomery, probably a different style of band leader, very laid back. But nevertheless, he got results by just being a great guitarist and getting the best out of his musicians. And I think that's one of the important things, actually, in terms of band leading, is the most important thing is actually to get the most out of your musicians. It's not there to show you off and to make you look like the great musician you are, or not. It's to get the best out of your players, because the better they look and the better they sound, the better you're going to come across as a group, and that includes yourself as well. So get the most out of your musicians. Different ways of doing this. You can find out what they like, find out what their level of experience is and talent, and perhaps just push it a little bit each time, put in a song which is just a little bit beyond their capabilities, gives them something to learn. They'll feel great once they've achieved that. If they don't like a certain style of music, perhaps just put one song in the set of that style. And you never know, if it goes down well and everyone enjoys it, that's often the reason they start to like it. It's not because it's their favorite kind of music, it's because it went down well. I know in Dukes, for example, the ukulele band, we play an awful lot of songs that I wouldn't dream of buying, but I love them because they go down well. And I have a great time on stage playing them. And what's not to like about that? So there's lots of different ways of encouraging your musicians to get the best out of them. Okay, I'm just going to have a look at the chat box to see if we're going to see if there's any questions. I don't think we've got any yet. We might have. I'm going to unmute Tony in a minute, and let me just see what's going on in the chat room. Right, I'm just going to unshare that and stop and have a chat with you all and see what... how are we doing? Thumbs up, you all still awake? Good. Oh, you can hear me as well, that's excellent. Right. Okay, I'm just going to have a look down the chat log and see what's... morning all, morning all. You're having a conversation with each other. Do you want to say something about preparing rehearsals? I'll ask Mick about that in a second. And Gil, is having sheet music iPads with him performs acceptable? Good question. And another question here. Our old band singer used an iPad on the mic stand. Is it better if musicians have the tracks memorized? Yes, a couple of good questions there. Right, first of all, just going to unmute Mick Foster, and there he is, and he can ask his question.
You actually answered it, because I put that up before you started talking about preparing rehearsals, but okay. While we're on that, you might want to say something as well about your views on professional performance at gigs and something which has been a source of some controversy in the band, which is your ideas about the dress code.
Right, okay. We'll start with the dress code. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on dress code, except I think there should be one. Our current dress code happens to be black and white, so white shirt, black trousers, black jacket, and so on. And if that's the decision to have that look, then that's what we go for. If the decision is to wear jackets and casual trousers, that's fine. I think that's my only view on that, is that if there is a decision to dress code, to go with it. Some bands just get up and dress fairly just how they, they might have just been shopping in a supermarket and then turn up on stage and play. I do personally feel like, from an audience's point of view, especially if you've paid or you've made an effort, or you've got in babysitters and so on, that you come here to be entertained. It does look good if the band look like they've actually made an effort to entertain you. It looks like there's some thought in what is going on the stage. If you're a brilliant musician, I know Miles Davis often gets cited as being the kind of guy who just turns up and plays and then walks off. Then that's great, and you can get away with that. But I think for the majority of us, we've got to make the most of it. And so the dress code, I think, is just part of making a performance as professional as possible. Sorry, mate, what was the first question you had?
I can't remember now. I think I was wondering if you're going to say something about actually getting gigs and your responsibilities at a gig and responsibilities to the venue as well. You said a little bit about that, but I think there's a few more things about, making sure people put money behind the bar, helping people to set up and getting there on time. There's been other bits and pieces around the actual running of the gig itself.
Yes, no, that's all good points. And as Mick was saying, it's we have responsibilities as entertainers to do those things. Especially with the difficulty in getting gigs. We've got to imagine ourselves back a few months now, I think. But the difficulty in getting gigs, and if it is as hard as to get a gig as it is, we just got to do our best to keep that gig. A venue is only going to keep you booked for a couple of times if takings are not very good. So, and drink is the way, and drinks and meals are often the way with pubs that make their money. So we do have to encourage people to drink and eat at our gigs. It's black and white as that, really. If the pub doesn't make any money, he's going to go out of business. He's not going to rebook you. So nice, though, that it is. Unfortunately, some people do feel that music should be free, and there's a bit of a culture of this now, especially with things like Spotify. Although we do pay for Spotify, it's kind of free when you play the track, and this sometimes runs over into gigs. People like to think they can just go and watch music for nothing. The musicians have got expenses as well as the venue itself, so Mick's quite right. Do buy drinks and eat, please, when you go to gigs next time you go to one, whenever that may be. As for the actual getting the gigs themselves, that's a bit of a black art. Perseverance, telephone calls, being very nice to managers. I'm sure a lot of you have got far more experience than me of getting gigs. Sometimes they've just fallen into my lap, and I thought, oh, that's great. But hard work is one of the things about getting gigs. I think that might be probably a chat for nearer the time when gigs are going to become more possible again. Do we have another question? We had a couple of questions about music on stage. I think we'll probably just address those. I would love it if, and we're talking probably more about jazz music now than rock music, because rock musicians don't tend to have music in front of them. Jazz music, okay, it's complicated, but you've taken it on board, so learn it. And I do believe that we should really be playing without music in front of us. It's not just a case of memorizing it, it's actually learning the stuff properly, learning your instrument well enough so that you can play without the music. It's one of those things where it can get in the way of entertainment. Are you really performing to an audience if your head is down looking at a sheet of music or an iPad? And probably no, you're probably not performing to the best of your ability. You're probably concentrating on the dots in front of you. So that's my belief. And in DWJQ, we are striving towards being a sheet music free environment, and we're getting there. We're nearly there. So I think the last 2 gigs I did with no music in front of me whatsoever. And after a while, you kind of get used to it and you wing it a little bit. And well, obviously, you spend a lot of time learning them as well. So yes, I would say encourage that all the time, to get rid of that sheet music as soon as possible. Right, I think we better move on, because I've got a little bit to talk about now in terms of playing music together during lockdown. So I'm not going to take any more questions for a little while to the end, because Tony Sandyman will run a Q&A at the end of this with me. So if anyone does have any more questions, we'll deal with them then. So let's get back to the my trumpet mute. By the way, I bought that trumpet mute to make me sound more like Miles Davis, and it hasn't worked yet. So, right. Okay. Now we're going to talk about playing during lockdown. Now, you're going to be all looking at that screen trying to find your own photograph, aren't you? Zoom, of course, seems to be on everyone's lips in terms of communications over the internet at the moment. Of course, other products are available, such as Skype, WhatsApp, and Facebook, and so on. I tend to use Zoom because it has certain abilities to project music in one direction. And any of you who have been on Freddie Freeloader Jazz Jams will know that the music comes from one place, me, plus a bit of guitar, and you play along with it at the other end without being able to hear anybody else. And it's okay. It's a bit of fun. It's a bit of practice. It's more of a practice session than a jam session. And people do seem to enjoy it. So, you know, Freddie Freeloader's jam session will carry on using Zoom to project the music. We use a thing called Band in a Box for the backing track. There's a screenshot there of from Band in a Box. Quite a bit of a complicated bit of software, but works quite well. Other backing tracks can be played from YouTube. I dare say you can get backing tracks on Spotify, and also the Jamie Aebersold backing tracks, which I have actually started using with a couple of musicians, Mick and Graham. And they work well as well in a jam, and Gil, in a jam, in that kind of situation. And using the software that Tony Sandeman described a couple of weeks ago, Transcribe, what we're now able to do is play the Jamie Aebersold tracks in Transcribe and change the pitch or the key. The tempo or the key. Using Transcribe to do that. In the old days, used to play the Jamie Aebersold backing track, and it was fixed. That was the key it was in, that was the speed it was going. But now with Transcribe, you can change both the key and the tempo. But we all know why this doesn't work on the internet very well, playing music, is because of the latency, the internet latency, which is a fancy word for delay. Really, the latency is the time taken from a note or a bit of information to be sent and for it to be received. So clearly there's a bit of a delay, enough of a delay for a musician to notice it and not really be able to play proper music. Now, I know Steve Duke, who I don't know if he's still here, and Colin Wilson and others have said they use Jamkazam. And so that prodded me into thinking, well, maybe there is another way of playing live music, not using Zoom. So I and others in the band have been looking at Jamkazam. Now, in theory, you can play with very little latency, very little delay, using Jamkazam and play live. And sure enough, we have actually achieved it in a limited fashion. And I think the future looks bright in that once the rest of the band members have got the right equipment, we'll be able to all play using this Jamkazam software. Now it's free. I should say there are other kinds of there are other websites. Jammr, Jammr is another one, and I'm sure there are many more. But of course, like all these things, you have to stick to one, otherwise they're not compatible. So we're having a go at getting Jamkazam to work. And this is a brief overview of what we've had to do. It's not going to explain how it's done. Believe me, it's not the best website in the world. It's hard going. If you manage to get this to work within an hour or so, you're done very well. It's taken us weeks, not weeks continuously, but weeks of every hour and every now and again. You need one of these. You need a digital audio interface. This is a way of connecting your musical instrument via a microphone or a jack socket directly into the computer via the USB. They're from £60 to £100 or more. They've been around for a long time. Musicians use them for recording onto their laptops. So if you've already got one, that's great. but you definitely need one of those to avoid using the laptop's own microphone, which has its inbuilt sort of delay and compression and other horrible things. You need what's called an Ethernet connector. Now, this is not as frightening as it sounds. It's the cable that came with your computer, or router rather, when you first bought it. It looks a bit like a telephone cable, but it's actually got 8 prongs rather than 4. And it's for bypassing your Wi-Fi. So you plug your laptop directly into your router, and it takes out the delay that's inherent in the Wi-Fi signal. You can buy short ones if you happen to sit next to your router. But I know somebody who's got a music studio way down in the bottom of his garden without Wi-Fi. But you can buy 100-meter cables for not a huge amount of money and connect it to the router in the house. So it's possible. So that's one of the things you do need to do, is connect your laptop to your router, just to save the latency. What we're trying to do is get the delay down and down and down. A microphone is a good idea because you'll need to plug into that digital audio interface, and it's very important to have a pink sparkly one, so make sure you buy one of those. And a pair of headphones. I worked out the other day, using a bit of simple O-level physics, that the delay of listening to speakers 6 feet away is about 6 milliseconds. Now, I know we have a physics teacher in the group listening to this, so I'm sure you can verify that or otherwise. But that is a noticeable sort of delay. We're trying to get this down to very few milliseconds. So 6 milliseconds because of the speed sound travels from the speakers to your ears, headphones is going to reduce that latency by a few milliseconds as well. So that's important. And it's also important to have a good laptop, a recent one, although we're finding that it doesn't make such a huge difference after compared to some of the other things. The latency isn't so much in the laptop itself, it's in the internet, of course, and it's in the digital interface that I was talking about earlier. So, but a good computer obviously is a helpful thing to have. But as I was saying, all the time we're thinking about pairing off milliseconds. I'm using this photo because Lewis Hamilton, I read this in an Ian Wright autobiography recently about Lewis Hamilton, how even though he whizzes around the racetrack in no time, he's still trying to shave off milliseconds of his time by tweaking here and tweaking there. And with Jamkazam, it's a difficult, I will admit, it's a difficult website to use. You are constantly going back to it, trying to shave off another few milliseconds, getting that latency down. One of the things Jamkazam has is a little meter to show you whether you've got your latency down to a playable level. And it's in a red, green and orange lighting system. And we have finally got it down to a green light, which means we're down to about a delay of 20 milliseconds. Now, just to give you an idea, if you're playing a song at 160 beats a minute, which is not fast, a semi-quaver is 100 milliseconds long. So we're talking about a delay of 20. Double that up to 40, because in signal you've got to go to the person and back again. We're already talking even with Jamkazam, you're still approaching the length of a semi-quaver. So, so there's always going to be a little bit of delay, and we're still trying to get it even lower than that. I do encourage people to use, not necessarily Jamkazam, but whatever your fellow musicians are using, because I think we're in this for the long run. I don't think we're going to suddenly stop using these things once we all return to normal either. I think when we see the advantages of practicing with a band from home and being able to work out arrangements and check keys and all that sort of thing without necessarily all having to get together, I think we'll continue to do this in addition to having the traditional rehearsal as well. Just to compare Zoom with Jamkazam, obviously Zoom is cheap, lots of people use it, and it's easy to use. But you can't play together, and the audio quality is not great. And obviously Jamkazam has got those qualities which Zoom doesn't have. It is very good quality, I might actually play you a little audio clip. It's not a particularly great bit of music, but it is just going to show you how two instruments can play together. It's very difficult to set up. You do have to have oodles of patience and time, but don't be put off, because in the long run, it will be worth it. And there are some costs, because you might have to buy a box of tricks, a digital audio interface. Now, I'm just going to stop this share for a second, and because we're nearly finished anyway. I just want to see if this works. It's a little recording of me and John Mattick, the bass player, playing bass and guitar, and we're playing it fairly tentatively, I've got to say, because it's the first time we've just got the delay down to a reasonable amount. Hopefully you can hear this. It's just a bit of bass and guitar. John's playing away on the bass, I'm playing the lead, and I did feel quite relaxed and not thinking, oh, he's slowing down or anything, but so this is using Jamkazam, just live, both talking to each other beforehand, then just counted in and off we went. And now I'm just going to say, I mean, I can only say how I felt. As a guitarist, I was feeling quite relaxed as that was going on. I wasn't worried too much. And so from my point of view, I'm saying we haven't got great equipment. We've got decent equipment. I haven't got a particularly high-speed internet line, which does help, but I haven't got one. And we did achieve that amount of ability to play together. So I think it is something worth pursuing. Let's just go back. We've only got a couple more slides now. I can see time's moving on. So, okay, let's move on. So yeah, so there's a long road ahead. But as I say, I think we're going to be still doing this in years to come, even after the current situation has finished. Right, just tidying up. Any questions, just pop them in the chat box. And I do hope you've found some of this interesting and take away at least a couple of things. If there's 50 of you listening and you take away 2 things each, that's 100 results. So that's great. Perhaps just ought to finish off with a bibliography, as all presentations should do. Yeah, a couple of things came out of the Ian Wright book I was reading at the same time. It's a great read and gave me a couple of ideas. But also this book. And it's available on the internet. It's written a long time ago, 40, 60 years ago probably. It's Horace Silver's book about the art of small jazz combo playing. And it's really interesting. Some of it's not quite so relevant nowadays. He does use some very old-fashioned terms. But he does talk a lot about playing in a band, listening to your band leader, also what the band leader's got to do. And it's got a lot of his compositions at the back as well. There's about 6 of his tunes nicely arranged. So I do recommend that book, The Art of Small Combo Jazz Playing. It's interesting. You don't get many books where you can actually read about the subject. A lot of it's just music and so on. But okay. Right, I think it's time to hand back to Tony. I'll just stop the share and unmute you. And Tony can explain that photo if you like. Tony, would you like to unmute yourself? And is he there? He's not listening, is he? I can't hear him. I can't unmute you, Tony. Tony Sandy. There you go. There you go.
Right. Okay. Can you now hear me?
Yes, I can. Good.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dave. That was really interesting and covered a lot of stuff that I have been a band leader on several occasions. So certainly, and there were questions there that you answered. From my point of view, so really interesting. Great.
Thank you.
Quite a few points came up whilst you were talking. So we'll bring everyone in. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a quick break because I'm going to have to go and grab myself a coffee. Think about what sort of you'd like to chat to Dave about, or myself, or any of the band leaders that are here online at the moment, and ask questions. I've got plenty of questions myself, but I'd like to hear from you guys rather than just me spouting off. So grab yourself a coffee. I'll see you back here in 5.